we go.
Today is January 26th, 2024. I'm Doris Lazarus, conducting an interview with Ginger Lane in Chicago, Illinois, in English. Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Ginger Lane, and I live in Chicago.
Do you have a middle name?
Well, I have a number of names. Officially, I'm Virginia Susan Spiegel Lane, but that's my American name. I wasn't born with that name.
Let's go back to Ginger Lane.
Okay.
Can you please just spell your first and last name?
Ginger is Ginger. Lane is Lane.
What was your name at birth?
Bela Weber.
Can you spell that, please?
Bela, and Weber is Weber.
Did you have any other names?
Well, I did have a middle name, and that is Veronica. But I didn't know that until my daughter discovered it when she was back in Germany this past year.
Can you spell that first name, please?
Veronica, Veronica.
And you just mentioned some other names. Did we get all of them?
Virginia is Virginia. Susan, Susan. Spiegel, which is my adoptive name, Speigel. And Lane, Lane.
So just to clarify, your name at birth?
My name at birth was Bela Weber.
And your name when you came to be adopted?
When I became adopted, I became Virginia Susan Spiegel. And then when I got married, we added the name Lane because that was my husband's last name.
And how did you become Ginger?
I became Ginger. My parents, my adoptive parents, gave me a choice because I was an older child when I came here to the United States. And they said, well, you're in America. Bela it's a European name. It's actually a Hungarian man's name. And we'd like you to have an American name. So they gave me a choice of, I think, Topsy and Ginger, and I chose Ginger. What I didn't know at the time, and I liked the sound of Ginger, what I didn't know is that Gingy is Hebrew for red.
When were you born?
I was born November 27th, 1939.
How old are you today?
Today I'm 84.
What's the name of the town that you were born in?
Berlin.
What were your maternal grandparents' names?
Well, you've got me there. I have to think about that a minute. Anna and I think my maternal grandfather's name was Alexander, and that is my birth father's name as well.
What was your grandparents' ethnicity? Where were they from?
They were from a town called Paderborn in Westphalia, Germany, and they were Catholic.
What languages did they speak?
I beg your pardon?
What languages did they speak?
They spoke German.
Do you remember your grandparents?
No, not at all.
What was your mother's name?
My mother was Lena Banda, and she was Hungarian.
Where was she born? What city?
She was born in Rakospolita, Hungary, which is sort of a suburb of Budapest.
Can you spell your mother's name, please?
Lina is Lina, Banda Banda.
What was her ethnicity?
She was born an Orthodox Jew.
What was her family like?
What was my family like?
Her family.
Her family. She was the my mother was the daughter of an Orthodox cantor. And I know very little about the family, but he was, of course, very religious and dedicated. And so when my father wanted to marry my mother, he had to convert to Judaism because he had been born Catholic.
How was that accepted in your family? How was that accepted in your family?
Well, when he met my mother, it's a little bit like the story of Rachel. He traveled to Hungary to sell umbrellas, which was part of the and walking sticks, which was in the family business. And he came to this village and wanted some water, and lo and behold, there was Rachel at the well. And she gave him some water. They became friends, and then he wanted to marry her. So he underwent teaching and circumcision and became a converted Jew. And then when they traveled back to Germany, because of course he wanted to introduce my mother to his family, they disowned him. It did not sit well with them at all. So it became a broken family.
Did your mother receive an education?
I don't believe she did, but I don't know.
Do you know what your mother looked like?
I have pictures of her, and I know that she had very long, very black hair, which is very different from the way that I look. But I suppose you could say that she had sort of a stereotypical Eastern European Jewish look about her. She was dark and with beautiful black hair.
Do you have any memories of your mother?
I have almost no memories. I was very young when she was taken, and I was 3.5. And the only thing that I know about her is that she was a chain smoker. She was very dedicated to her children and family, and she called all of us her swallows, and would drag us with her wherever she was going. And I know, I didn't know it then, but I know that she worked for the underground. So she was part of the resistance, which is, I'm sure, why she was taken.
We're going to talk more about what happened after the rise of Hitler. But getting back to your family, do you know if your mother observed Shabbat?
Oh, absolutely. She was very Orthodox, and so we all lived in an Orthodox home. She observed Shabbat. We had Seder every year, so I'm told, and where we children would sit on a plank because there weren't enough chairs, and we had that. And she, my sisters have told me that she made a wonderful plum kuchen, so they were very fond of that.
What type of dish is that?
It's a dessert.
What were your paternal grandparents' names?
I don't remember.
Do you know where they were born?
Where
Your father's parents were born?
I'm thinking, I think they were from Paderborn in Westphalia, Germany.
What was your father's name?
Alexander
His last name?
Weber.
Can you just spell that, please?
Alexander is Alexander. Weber is Weber.
Where was your father born?
In Paderborn.
What did he look like?
Well, the pictures that I have of him show a very serious-minded, sort of a formal portrait of him with sort of medium to dark hair, although I kind of remember that he had a short red beard, which is where I think I got my red hair from.
What type of education did he receive?
I don't know what kind of education he received. He went into the family business, which was selling umbrellas.
Do you have memories of your father?
I have a few memories of him. I know that he always tinkered with radio parts and electrical things, and he wasn't a certified electrician originally, but he became one. And many years later, when we were able to bring him to the United States, he worked at the University of Chicago as an electrician.
Do you know about your father's religious upbringing before he converted?
I don't know his upbringing, except he was Catholic. So I'm assuming that he was raised in a traditional Catholic family. I know that he had a friend who was a priest at some point, which was very fortuitous and beneficial for his children.
Do you have siblings?
I have I have a number of different types of siblings. I have 6 sisters. No, sorry, I have 5 sisters and a brother. That's part of my birth family. My brother Alphonse is the eldest, then my sister Senta, then Ruth, then Renee. No, I'm sorry. After Ruth comes Gertrude, then Renee, then Judith, and I'm the youngest, Bela. And there's a 12-year age difference between my brother Alphonse and me. So when we emigrated and came to the United States, he was 18 and I was 6.
You mentioned other family members.
Other siblings. My father remarried after my mother was killed, and he married a woman who had a daughter who was exactly my age. She was about 6. Her name is Gitta. And then together they had a child, my half-brother Harry. And they were all born in Berlin. And then in my adoptive family, after I lived with my parents for 4 years, we adopted my brother Jonathan, who was born in America. And then 4 years later, my sister Petra, who was Italian. She lived in an Italian orphanage.
Thank you. In what city did you grow up?
Well, I've spent the first 6.5 years of my life in Berlin, although part of that time we lived outside of Berlin. And then once I came to the United States, I spent the rest of my time in Chicago.
What language did you speak at home?
I spoke German when I was born, and then at the end of the war, we were beginning to learn a tiny bit of English, although I don't remember that I even spoke any English then. But so when I came to the United States and finally got together with my adoptive parents, we spoke Yiddish because they didn't speak German and I didn't speak English, so Yiddish was the common language. But I very quickly learned English. That was at the forefront of my mind. I didn't want anything to do with Germany.
Did your parents have a house or an apartment in Germany?
An apartment. And we first lived, at first actually, they lived in Dortmund, which was not far from Paderborn, and where my brother Alphonse and my sister Senta were born, in Dortmund. And then they moved to Berlin, and the rest of us were born in Berlin, and we always lived in an apartment.
How would you describe your family's economic status?
Well, we were very poor. And we lived in an area of Berlin called the Scheunenviertel, which is the barn quarter. And that was near the Alexanderplatz, which is a central marketing area and transportation hub. And it was a district that was lower middle class, actually even lower than them, more poor, filled with drunks, alcoholics, prostitutes, Jews. It was a very mixed district. Today, it's a very fashionable district in Berlin, full of trendy shops and things, but then it was not.
Do you remember any favorite holidays, Jewish holidays, as a child?
Not in Berlin, I don't.
Would you know what the relationship was between Jewish people and non-Jewish people in the neighborhood that your parents lived in?
I am thinking that it was probably a mixed bag, but we lived in a very diverse area. So there were many non-Jews, but there were also many Jewish people who lived there. My mother, as I mentioned earlier, was born in Hungary, and so she had a lot of friends who were Roma, and I think she got along very well. She was very gregarious and got along very well with neighbors and women in the neighborhood, Jewish or non-Jewish.
Are you aware if anti-Semitism existed in the school or in the neighborhood?
Oh, yes. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. And, I mean, my father had been arrested in 1933, long before I was born, and put in the first concentration camp, which was Oranienburg, right in Berlin. And he was there for 10 months. He was arrested for his political, quote, leftist beliefs. Whether he was actually a communist or not, I don't know. But then once he came out, he was released. Once he came out, he never talked about his time there. And then after I was born, I think in about 1942, the schools were closed to Jewish children. So I, of course, was too young to be in school, but my siblings, after 1942, couldn't go to school anymore. We were supported because we were so poor and my father couldn't get a job. We actually lived on welfare and were supported by the Jewish community of Berlin.
Do you remember when your parents sensed danger for the first time? Was it prior to your father being arrested?
I would think yes. I mean, Hitler came into power, January 30th, 1933. My father was arrested in March of 33. And so right then, it was already bad news for Jews.
How was your family made aware that he was arrested and taken to a concentration camp?
I don't know. That's a very good question, but I don't know the answer.
Do you know how long he was in that concentration camp?
He was in concentration camp for 10 months.
What was he like when he got out?
My brother describes him as being a broken man. He never wanted to talk about his time. I mean, it must have been horrible in the camp. And he was at hard labor, I know that. And he was, I'm sure, very withdrawn and quiet. I know that he couldn't get a job, which is why we lived on welfare. And my mother actually became a superintendent of our building to earn a little bit of money. And it wasn't until probably 1939 or 1940 that he was able to get a job. So, and it was, still part of the Depression, which was worldwide and very bad for the German population. So, and I'm thinking it had to be devastating for him. He couldn't support a family, and he had all these children to take care of. And with the political situation and Hitler, it was a very frightening time.
Tell me about his release from the concentration camp. How did he get out?
I don't know. I don't know how he got out. I'm thinking that there was perhaps a general release. In Oranienburg, those first arrests were for political prisoners, homosexuals, people with disabilities, anybody who wasn't part of the, quote, Aryan brotherhood, end quote. But I don't know. I do know that my mother went to the police to try to get him released. And I don't know the specifics of that, whether she was helpful in getting his release or not. I do know that he had a friend who was a Catholic priest. My father had a friend who was a Catholic priest. Maybe the priest helped to free him, but I just don't know.
You mentioned that your mother had also been arrested?
My mother was arrested not until 1943. So my father had been arrested in 1933, 10 years before. And in 1943, when I was already now 3 years old, she was arrested because, as I mentioned earlier, she was smuggling people in and out of our apartment building, helping them get out of Berlin. And these were primarily Roma and friends. And she also worked on she traded in the black market to try to provide for us. I was going to mention something that I'd forgotten, and now I can't think of it. But if I do, I'll add it.
So your mother was arrested because of her underground activities?
My mother was arrested, yes. She was arrested a couple of times. She was arrested and then released, and then arrested again. and released. And my father was also arrested in 1943. And then the 7 of us children were arrested. Well, we were taken to the Jewish hospital, which had sort of been turned into an incarceration point, and it actually was a collection site for deportation to the east. And we lived there, I think, for about a month before we were released.
Where was that hospital?
In Berlin, not too far from where we lived.
Do you know where they had planned to take the children that were in the hospital? Where were they going to be deported to?
Well, my mother was sent to Auschwitz in the spring of 1943. We were supposed to follow her a week later. But we were spared that because a neighbor of ours who was a farmer, who was ostensibly a member of the Nazi Party, found out that we were supposed to follow. And he said to and my father had been released by that time. He said to my father, "Let me take the children and take them out to my farm, about 60 kilometers east of Berlin, to a village called Worin, Worin. And they can live there because your wife is gone, and how can you take care of 7 children on your own?"
What was this man's name?
His name was Arthur Schmidt. And after a number of other instances, we called him our savior, because he, along with his wife, took us out to this village. And we lived on that farm for almost 2 years in hiding.
Did you or your family know what happened to your mother after she was sent to Auschwitz?
We, in December of 1943, we received a notification that she had died. And supposedly she died of influenza or angina, but we don't know. But we did get an official notification stating not only the date of her death, but the time, to the minute, to the hours and minutes that she died. And then it also had listed her birth date, when she was born, the name of her parents. So it was all very strictly documented, very efficient on the Germans' part.
How was that message delivered to your family?
I think by mail. I'm not sure.
And who
But it was an official notice.
Do you know who it came from?
The Nazis. Beyond that, I mean, some governing body.
Do you think it was hard for your father to make the decision to release 7 children to Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt?
I don't think it was hard for him, because he knew that we would be safe. He, meanwhile, continued to live in Berlin because he now had a job working as an electrician. But he would come out to visit us on some weekends, which was good. My brother also, at this point, was about 15 or so. So he was often in Berlin with my father and was able to work. He had worked in a bakery. He worked helping my father with electrical business. But they would come out on the weekends. No, I think my father was very happy that we would be safe. And then he could continue doing what he needed to do to support us.
Was it risky for your brother as a young Jewish boy to go back into Berlin?
Yes. And I mean, in writing a short history, my brother recounted being stopped by kids, by a lot of bullying and teasing, having to then later prove that he was Jewish. My father also, by the way, had to prove that he was Jewish by reciting the Shema, which he did, because they thought that he was the government thought that he was trying to evade capture. This was post-war. I'm jumping ahead, sorry. But for my brother, it was difficult. As a child, I mean, reading his history, he loved being a kid and was always interested in learning and playing. But as he got older, it became more difficult. And then friends of his would disappear, never to be heard from again. So it was hard.
Do you think there's any possibility that your mother knew all of her 7 children were going to be saved?
I don't. I mean, that's pure conjecture on my part. I would like to think that she knew we would be all right, but I can't imagine that she did.
So when you were taken by Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt, what was the age range among you and your 6 siblings?
Well, I was about 3.5 when we went out to the farm. And my brother would have been 15 or 16. So there's a good, 10-year age range. And what I forgot to mention was that I told you that my father had a friend who was a priest. And at some point, I don't know exactly when, but my brother Alphonse had been bar mitzvah. He and the older girls went to a Jewish school. But at some point, the priest said to my father, we're going to do a conversion. I'm going to get them baptized as Catholic so that they will be safe. And so we were baptized.
After you were taken to the farm?
I don't know if it was before or after. It had to be before, because we lived on that farm for almost 2 years, and I don't remember ever coming back to Berlin. A couple of my sisters did, but I didn't.
What was the time frame? When were you taken to that farm?
In the spring of 1943. So shortly after it was right after my mother was taken and deported.
Do you know if Mr. and Mrs. Schmidt accepted payment from your family?
I don't see how they could have accepted any payment. We had nothing. No, I think he was just, especially Herr Schmidt. He was a lovely, jovial man. I remember being fond of him. I liked him. His wife, Paula, was more standoffish. I don't think she was thrilled that he brought the 7 of us out there. I'm sure she was scared, because had they been discovered, they put their lives at risk. So it was not an easy thing for her. And she while we were on the farm, we were very much by ourselves. I mean, I don't remember that, and my sisters don't remember that she cooked for us or provided for us or anything. We were left to our own devices.
Did they have any of their own children?
They did, well, Frau Schmidt, Paula Schmidt, was Herr Schmidt's second wife. So there was he and his first wife had a son. But I never knew that. I've only learned that in doing research. And jumping far, far ahead, not only was there a son, there was a grandson, and we got to meet the grandson who didn't know what his grandfather had done.
As we move on, I'd like to hear more about that story and that reunion. When you went into hiding, did you have to change your names?
Change our names? Not that I recall.
Did you go to church?
I don't think so.
So describe the structure or where you were kept.
We lived in a separate building from the main house. It was the laundry shed, and we were all in that one room together. I don't know what it looked like. I don't have any memory of our being there. There must have been a stove for cooking or something. I know that we spent our time by ourselves. And I do have memories of playing out in the field, because it was a fruit orchard rather than a working farm. But I would play out in the field, and I was always hungry, and I was always lonely. And so I spent a lot of time digging for potatoes. I had no playmates. We didn't go into the village of Vorin. So we were very isolated. But remember, while we didn't say we weren't Jews, we also didn't advertise the fact that we were. And unbeknownst to me, the mayor of the village, a Rudy Fairman, knew about us and actually provided us with extra ration cards, which is remarkable. Never turned us in. The Schmidts never turned us in. I thought nobody knew that we were there. Apparently, some people in the village did know. They never turned us in. The only reason I believe that my mother was deported was because someone had betrayed her among her friends and turned her in. And so the Gestapo came and took her away. I was home alone with her in our apartment. And two men showed up at the door, and I was hiding behind a door or something. They took her down. I climbed up on a windowsill and looked down and saw her being put into a black car, and never saw her again. I had no idea why she was going.
Did you miss your mother?
I don't remember my mother very well, but yes, I did miss her. And so I formed, I think, a close bond with one of my sisters, Gertrude, who was 6 years older than I. She was kind of like a surrogate mother, a mother figure. And I would always say to her, why am I always so alone? I'm always so alone. I had no one to, a tiny child, had no one to play with. No one, I guess, to read me bedtime stories or tell me things. So it was, but then again, I was born into war, and it was normal. And when people have said to me, well, wasn't it difficult being so poor? No, it wasn't, because that was what was normal. I didn't know anything different. And none of us did. We just accepted it.
Do you know if you were able to take anything into hiding with you? Any possessions?
When we were arrested and taken to the Jewish hospital, we weren't under lock and key. And so we could wander around and come and go as we liked, but we lived there. But my brother left and went back to our apartment, and he took some documents and things up to the attic in our building to hide them. And when he came back to the hospital, they discovered that he had gone, and so they did lock him up. And after that, we were, basically imprisoned. But in terms of, so today, we do have documentation. I don't know what made him say these are things to preserve. So we have pictures. We have ration cards. We have things that declaring that my father was a victim of fascism. And my brother he's the one who collected all of that and kept it, and then brought it to America with us, which is remarkable that he had that kind of foresight.
Do you remember what a typical daily routine was like in hiding?
I don't remember a typical daily routine, except that I was outside in the field. I was probably cold, hungry, and lonely, and I have no idea what it was like, other than that.
You were in hiding for a total of 2 years?
Almost 2 years, yes.
Do you know if you had false papers?
Did we have false papers? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect not, because I'm guessing that if we'd had some, my brother would have made sure that to keep them and bring them with us. So I don't think we did.
What can you tell me about your liberation, or when you realized the war was coming to an end?
Well, this village of Varin, which was 60 kilometers east of Berlin, was on the direct route back to Berlin from the east. So as the Russians were marching towards Berlin, Herr Schmidt said, this is no longer safe for the children to live here. And he packed us up. We got into a truck. In the back of his truck, they put a tarp over us, covered us up, and took us back to Berlin. And this was 2 weeks before liberation. And so when we came back into Berlin, we went back to our apartment, but there was street-to-street fighting. I didn't know whether it was going to be the end of the war or not. I was frightened. There was a lot of bombing going on. Our building got a direct hit. So suddenly we didn't have a place to live. And we had to, during that time, we would run, because my father figured out how to get notice on the radios that he was building about German air raids. And so with enough notice, we would run to the Alexanderplatz and go down in the lower level, which had become an air raid shelter. And we'd spend our time there. But this one time, we didn't get enough notice. And so the bomb came. All we were able to do was go down into the basement of our building. And we actually, from the direct hit of the bomb, we were locked in because of all the rubble from the building. And wouldn't you know it, Arthur Schmidt again became our savior because he dug us out. He was a remarkable man.
Was your father in the apartment when you returned?
I don't know.
How would you describe your official liberation? What happened?
Well, I know that we suddenly found ourselves living in the eastern sector that was controlled by the Russians, because we were in East Berlin. It may have been liberation, but it didn't feel, at least from one of my sisters, it wasn't much of a liberation because the Russians, were looking for young girls, and they took one of my sisters, Senta, and she did not return for several days. And another sister, Ruth, they had wanted to take her, but I think a neighbor or somebody said, she's just a kid, leave her alone. And they did. So it didn't, I mean, I can't tell you that I was ecstatic. I was scared. There were bombs, there were street-to-street fighting, there was seeing men in uniform and the sound of the heavy boots marching down the street. That was scary. I remember hiding behind my father, kind of looking to see what was happening on the street. It didn't feel like much of a liberation until we came to America.
Did your sister ever talk about what happened when the Russians took her?
She never talked about it, except that we knew. Well, I didn't know, but my sisters knew. I mean, she had, and she was 16, so she was old enough to be wanted by them. And they did what they wanted with her. And she returned and didn't talk about it, except that she had sort of a haunted look about her, as did my father after he had been arrested in 1933. This kind of gaunt, haunted look, so different from a regular face.
What happened next? What were your plans?
I don't know what the plans were, except that I think in the fall of 1945, I think it was then that my sister Ruth took me with her, because there was always talk about wanting to leave Germany, but we had no money. So there was no way for us to get out. We had no one who could sponsor us to get out. But my sister Ruth dragged me along. The first thing she did was we'd go to movie theaters, because she loved the movies. She was very theatrical and dramatic. And she plopped me down in a seat. And I don't know what she went off and did, but there I was, this 4 or 5 year old kid sitting in a movie that I didn't know anything about. But then she took me with her to a building which turned out to be the Joint Distribution Committee of the that was helping. This is post-war now, helping get refugees out of the country. And she told them that we wanted to go to America. And that started the process. And they told us, or they told her, that it would be better, that there were 7 of us children. It would be better if we declared ourselves orphans because we'd be able to get out faster, and that my father would follow in a couple of weeks. One thing I do remember, because we sat there in this building all day waiting for some interviewer to talk to somebody, was that a soldier came out and he picked me up, and little kid, and he was black, and I wiped his face, not knowing that was his skin. And I remember that I think he gave us some chocolate, which probably I promptly threw up because of the sweetness of it. But that started the process of our emigrating to America. And then perhaps in January of 1946, so I don't know really what we did between liberation and January, except to begin the process of wanting to emigrate.
Was your father involved in this process?
I think my father, he knew about it, but he wasn't directly involved. It was really my sister Ruth who kind of took charge of that. And in January of 1946, we began moving from DP camp to DP camp. The first one was right in Berlin. That was Zellendorf. Then we moved to a DP camp near Munich called the Funkkaserne. And then eventually we got to a DP camp just a bit north of Munich, which was Indersdorf. And that was actually a Catholic cloister turned into a refugee spot for children. So it was a children's camp, which was much better for us. The first 2 were more adult camps, and we should not have been there. And then after, we lived there at this cloister for about 6 weeks, and then got on a train and to Bremerhaven so that we could board ship to come to America.
So from the time you were liberated until you started your journey to try to emigrate, what condition were you in after your 2-year experience in hiding?
I think we were happy. We knew that we were going someplace else, and that Papa would follow us in 2 weeks. So I don't think, and it turned out that he didn't come for 10 years, but I don't think that, I think we felt that everything was going to be okay. We knew that we'd lost our mother, but we needed to move forward with life.
Do you know what condition you and your siblings were in physically?
Well, I know that we all had lice. We were all very, very thin. The children's cloister, I was now at this point almost 6, and they thought I was 3. So malnutrition. even, the first thing that my adoptive parents did when I got here was to try to fatten me up because I was so tiny. They thought in Germany that I was, and there was food shortage, so trying to get nutrition was difficult. And during that 2 weeks when I mentioned that we came back to Berlin before liberation, my sister Gertrude wasn't part of that. She wasn't aware of what was going on because she had been hit by a truck or a mail truck or something. And so she was in hospital. And so she didn't know what was going on. But the rest of us, we were still being taken care of by whatever Jewish community was left.
You said that you were advised to say that you were orphans. How could you do that if you still had a father?
We just said we didn't have any family. We said we're 7 children, and we need to leave.
When you were in the cloister, was that a nunnery?
I guess so. Well, I mean, yeah, it was Catholic sisters were taking care of us. It was as I mean, I'm not. I was going to say as I remember, but I don't really remember. Except yes, we were well fed and taken care of and given clothing and maybe deloused. I don't know.
Do you remember how long you stayed there?
About 6 weeks in the cloister.
Where did you go after that?
We got on a train and went directly to Bremerhaven. And Bremerhaven was where we boarded the very first ship to leave Germany post-war. In December of 1945, President Harry Truman decommissioned this transport ship, it was a troop transport ship called the SS Flasher. And we, along with 800 other people, were fortunate enough to be on that ship to be able to come. And it was about a 10-day voyage, of which I remember lots of oranges and lots of seasickness. And I remember arriving in New York and being, I have to back up a tiny bit, in that we had lived through the war all together. And we got on the ship and they said, girls go here, boys go there. Well, we'd never been separated. And so we said, no, we gotta get our brother in with us. So we sneaked him into our cabin so that we could continue to be together. And when we arrived in New York, which was actually May 19th, 1946, we were told to go to sleep, and in the morning, you have to get up very early because you're going to see something. So in the morning of May 20th, so we laid at anchor in the harbor. And when we woke up, we were all told to come on deck and take a look. And what we saw was the Statue of Liberty. Well, it wasn't such a momentous thing for me because everybody had run over to the side of the ship, and I was afraid we were going to drown. I thought we would capsize. And of course, I didn't know what the Statue of Liberty was, but everyone else did, and we were thrilled.
Were you required to have a sponsor in order to emigrate?
Our sponsor was the Joint. and then eventually the Jewish Children's Bureau in Chicago, because we said we wanted to go to Chicago. Why did we want to go to Chicago? Well, my brother Alphonse heard of Al Capone, and he said, "Oh, that's where." We had a choice of New York, no, a choice of Miami, California, or Chicago. So we came to Chicago. And the Jewish Children's Bureau then became our sponsor. So it was the Jewish Federation.
Who greeted you when you arrived?
I beg your pardon?
Who greeted you? Was someone waiting for you?
There's, I guess, social workers. I know we took the train. I don't know how long that train trip was, but I know that we then went to the offices of the JCB, where when we first docked in New York, I'm backing up again. In New York, we docked at Pier 64. So we never went to Ellis Island, by the way. And we went into this enormous shed. There was a lot of, waving, screaming, crying because of the excitement of coming. And we had thousands of photos and pictures taken of us because it was unusual to have a family of 7 children, all intact. So we made all the headlines. I, of course, was scared of all the light bulbs flashing, of all the cameras. But we seemed to, this was the first troop transport ship that arrived with refugees from the war, from Germany. And it was, confusing but exciting time. We then lived in the Bronx for about a month to get acclimated, and for health reasons, we were quarantined there. And so there were social workers that had to be part of either HIAS or the joint that took care of us.
What happened after you left the Bronx?
Got on the train right from there. I mean, I remember that we went out to the store and bought shoes during one of our forays, and maybe more clothes or things. But then we got on the train and came directly to Chicago, to the Jewish Children's Bureau. We had more pictures taken. I have a photo of the 6 of us, or no, all 7 of us. I'm sitting on the desk at the JCB and having some ice cream or something. And then each of us were put in a taxi cab and dropped off at a foster home, all on the south side, Jewish foster homes, because who was going to take in 7 children? And after I had a couple of not happy experiences in a couple of foster homes, then I lived with one sister in her foster home, which was nice, until my eventually adoptive parents came and visited, and I lived with them.
So initially, were you all separated into different foster homes?
What was the question?
Initially, were you and your siblings all separated and placed in different foster homes?
We were each placed in a separate foster home, but we all had contact with one another. And even when I was initially living with the Spiegels, my adoptive parents, they would have the rest or some of my siblings come over so that I could spend time with them. But I had a lot of difficulty kind of not knowing where my loyalties should lie. And my siblings were saying, don't forget Mama, don't forget Papa. My adoptive parents were saying, "You're American," etc. So in the eyes of the Jewish Children's Bureau, they felt that it would be in my best interest if I no longer had contact with my German siblings. It was just too hard for me. I mean, I was 6.5 years old and didn't, confused and didn't know what I was about. But I knew that these very nice people wanted me to live with them and take care of me. So that was fine with me. And so I agreed to the adoption, whereas my sister Judith, who was 3 years older than I am, her foster parents wanted to adopt her, and she said no. But she was 9, perhaps almost 10.
Do you know why she said no?
Well, because we had a living father in Germany that we wanted to bring here.
Were you in contact with your father at this time?
I wasn't, but yet they were, especially my sister Judith. So she was instrumental in finally getting them, my father, his second wife, and their now 2 children, to come to America. That didn't happen until 1956.
Before your father came, were your other siblings, all but one, adopted?
I'm the only one that was adopted. Everyone else was in a foster home. My brother was 18, so the Jewish Children's Bureau actually were wonderful. They said, "You're 18, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go to college?" And so they supported him, and he went to college and became a physicist eventually. And he was able, I don't think he lived with them for very long, for the foster family, but they were lovely people, and he certainly kept in touch with him. And then he got married not long after that, and so did my sister Senta and Ruth. They were older. The younger ones, Renee and Judy and I, needed to live with a family and have parents.
During that time, you said that you didn't have contact with your siblings, but did your siblings have contact with each other?
My siblings all had contact with each other. I'm the only one who didn't. And which was very, it was, I mean, I knew I wanted to move on with my life, but there was guilt about not having contact with them. There was also guilt because I was now living a pretty privileged life. My father was a neurosurgeon. He was well known in Chicago and in the country. And I went to I started out at public school, but then went to a private school, and then went to Northwestern University. And except for my brother, who did go to IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, although he was sorry they had said you can go to the University of Chicago if you want to. But he, it was more interested in physics at that time. The rest of the family did not have any higher education. And through the years, there was a little bit of guilt tripping done. So that excuse me. So that I wasn't sure I wanted to reconnect with this family. I had my own life. They had their own life. There was, however, one incident where incident where I was in a restaurant with my parents, my now brother and sister, who were also adopted. It was a Chinese restaurant on 71st Street in Chicago. And as we came out of the restaurant, we were walking down the street, and we passed a family of 4 people, a mother, a father, a boy, and a girl. And as we passed each other, I kept staring at the man and not knowing who he was, but staring at him and turning around to look back at him as he turned around to look back at me. And it was my father. We never acknowledged each other. It was a sort of surreal incident. I think at about the same time, well, I would have been 16 at the time, because that's when they came here. I was a dance student downtown, and one day somebody walked up to me on the street and said, I'm not sure she said anything. She said, "Do you remember me?" And I started backing up, and I said, "I don't remember your name, but I don't want to go back." It was my sister Ruth, who, unbeknownst to me, had gone up to the dance studio and spoken with the dance director, who immediately called my father, my adoptive father, and told him that this young person had inquired about me and then waited for me till I came out. And she was told, then he reported this to the Jewish Children's Bureau, who said to my sister Ruth, this is my sister Ruth, the one who arranged for us to come to America in the first place, that if she had any further contact with me, they were going to deport her and send her back to Germany. That I had my own life. My father had given up his rights to me so that I could be adopted. And
I want to go back to that. Why did it take 10 years for your father to come to the U.S.?
That's a very good question, and I don't know the answer.
Did you know that he had remarried?
I didn't know it, I don't think, but my sisters and brother knew it.
Were you corresponding with your father?
I wasn't, but yes, they had some slight correspondence, a little bit. Not much.
Did your father marry a Jewish woman?
No. My father married a woman who lived in the building apparently after we left to start going from DP camp to he was just, he'd lost his wife. Now he didn't have his children. So he was really destroyed. And there was a woman who lived in the building who kind of nursed him back to health. And this was the woman that he married. My siblings then began to call her, after learning about her, called her Tante, because she wasn't their mother. But so there was some, and it was never a warm relationship, but it was there. But why it took 10 years, and maybe he didn't have the money? That's what I'm guessing.
Did he remain Jewish?
He did not remain Jewish. She was not Jewish. She actually had been married. Her husband had died. He was killed in the war. Her husband had been a soldier, and they were Catholic. So I think he the Germans had told my father early on that if he renounced his conversion, everything would be okay. And he would not renounce his conversion. He remained Jewish. But after we left, he then, I think, went back to, I don't know how religious he was, but he went back to being Catholic. And so they were raised, my stepsister and half-brother were raised as non-Jews.
What do you remember about finally seeing your father after so many years and just passing each other without acknowledging one another?
It was the strangest experience that I'd ever had. I knew I couldn't say anything. He knew he couldn't say anything. We had kind of given up our rights. I mean, I didn't, but he had to give up his rights so that I could be adopted. I knew if I said something, and I wasn't altogether sure that this was my father, but had I said something, in my mind, it would have meant that I was disloyal to my adoptive family. And that was paramount in my thinking. These people had raised me for 10 years or so, given me a loving home, did everything for me. And they were wonderful people. So I felt that that's where my allegiance lay. I couldn't see the possibility at that age of having two relationships. I also suddenly, once I was adopted, I now had American cousins, and a new American family. My father had been from Canada, so there was a whole Canadian family. I mean, it was a little bit of, how much can I take? And how much can I give? And I was probably a very selfish teenager who wanted a little bit of everything.
Did you ever see each other again?
Did I ever
see each other again?
Never.
You and your father?
Never.
Or have any relationship with your half-siblings?
In about back up, unbeknownst to me, several of my sisters always knew where I was, and they would sometimes follow me. I went to the University of Chicago High School. They would follow behind me. They once came to the apartment building that we lived in. They were about to ring the doorbell, and then they got chicken, so they didn't. My sister Ruth had, seen me at the dance studio downtown. They knew that my father was working at the University of Chicago. So it was almost as though somebody was watching out for me. And I always had this kind of feeling that there was somebody or something back there that was making sure that I was okay. In 1960, 3 days before I got married, I went to the pediatrician's office because you had to have a blood test. In those days, you had to have a blood test to make sure you didn't have venereal disease. I'm sitting in the pediatrician's waiting room, and two women walked up to me, and they said, "Are you Ginger?" I said, "Yes." can we talk to you for a minute? So we went out, and I said, of course. So we went out into the anteroom or something, and they said, where's your sisters? We're here because we use the same pediatrician you use, and we're here for an appointment with our children. We saw your picture in the paper because you're getting married, and we wanted to wish you well and to wish you a happy life. It was a very embarrassing exchange for me because I had not invited them to my wedding. I had not seen them that I could remember, except for, seeing my sister Ruth. These were my sisters Gertrude and Renee that approached me.
How many years had it been since you saw each other?
Well, this was now 1960. I would say 15 years. I mean, I last saw them in 1946. All right? Then in 1963, one question I always had when I started having children was, they don't look like me. Everybody has siblings. I didn't look like Jonathan. I didn't look like Petra. No resemblance. I didn't look like my parents. And I got a phone call in 1963. And I'll never forget this. I was in my apartment, standing at the ironing board, ironing, God knows what. And the phone rang, I answered it, and she said, hi, this is your sister Judith. I'm moving to Kansas next week, and I don't know if I'll ever come back to Chicago. Would it be okay? I would love to see you. And I said, oh, yes, absolutely. So we arranged for a few days from then she would come to see me. She came to the apartment. I opened the door, and it was the first time since 1946 that I saw someone who looked like me. And the flash of recognition was astounding. Because I said, Judith, we're sisters. We look alike. Because my children didn't look like me, or that I could see. And then we had a lovely visit. And she did ask me if I wanted to reconnect with our father, who was now living in Chicago. And I thought about it quite a bit. And I remember discussing it with my adoptive parents. I'm saying adoptive parents to distinguish between the birth and the adoptive. I consider them my parents. They're not adoptive to me, but for the purposes of this interview, I'm clarifying. I discussed it with my parents. And my father said, if you would like to make contact with your father, please feel free to do so. But know this, you can't just see him once out of curiosity. If you make contact, you will have to establish a relationship because it would not be fair to him. And so after discussing it with my husband, and I decided I would not. I just couldn't do it. Because I did, even though my father said, go ahead, I still felt that it would be a betrayal.
Before we hear more about your relationship with your siblings and your father here, I just want to go back to the time when you emigrated here. So you didn't speak the language. Were you put into school immediately?
I went, yes, the first school that I remember going to was Shakespeare Elementary School, where all I remember is that everybody made fun of me. I had a strong German accent. I still probably had my German name, hadn't been changed yet. And all I knew was that Germany, anything German was reprehensible. They were the bad people, and I wanted nothing to do with Germany. So my language, my accent, maybe my braids, I don't know, but anything that would remind me of Germany was verboten to me. I didn't want anything to do with it. So I worked very hard to learn English very quickly, which for a 6 or 7-year-old child is easy to do. But I forgot my German. Because my parents and I spoke Yiddish to each other a tiny bit, or I spoke German, they spoke Yiddish, so that we could understand each other. After a very short time, I didn't need to. I spoke a sort of a pidgin English, and we communicated that way. And I didn't, whatever customs I had, I no longer had. It was very important that I become truly Americanized. I didn't want anything that smacked of foreignness.
Were you aware if there were other children that had also emigrated here?
That also had come here. There was a girl in grammar school. Her name was Hannah Caston. Many years later, she was Hannah Weiss, and we got together. It was just a wonderful meeting. Hannah Caston did not come here until 1948 with her grandmother, and she lived in Berlin the entire time. I think her parents had died. I can't recall. So we had a wonderful reunion. So yes, I did know that there were others.
Once you made friends, did you talk to them at all about your experiences before coming here?
Well, I must have with Hannah, but perhaps superficially. And I didn't talk much about it. It was something we didn't talk about. I didn't even talk about it with my children. I didn't even talk about it much with my husband. He kept saying, well, don't you remember things from when you were 2 years old and 3? I said, no, who could remember back that far? He has a fantastic memory, and he remembered. So he thought I should, but no. A very interesting side note, I mentioned that I lost my German completely. Don't speak it, can't pronounce it, don't read it, nothing. In 1984, I had an accident, and I was in the hospital. That's why I use a wheelchair. So I was in the hospital for several months, and I was having a very difficult time. I was hallucinating a lot, and I was on morphine for a while, so some heavy drugs. And I dreamt in German. The language came right back. Today, I speak no German. I can't tell you what anything German looks like. But it's in the brain. It's back there. It's sort of an aside, but it's there. You never forget.
So at that time, you're learning to speak English, you're making friends. What were your goals?
to be a dancer. My goal in life was to be a dancer. That's all I ever wanted.
How did you get interested in dance?
I was dancing on the ship coming over, on the captain's table. This little kid entertaining the other passengers. So I was always very, very active and very athletic, very well coordinated. So, and then my mother, of course, took me to dance class, as all mothers take little girls to dance class. And then I was fortunate enough that they sent me to summer camp at Interlochen, Michigan, the National Music Camp. And the dance teacher there said, I've got the teacher for you in Chicago. It's only one person, Edna McCrae. You take her there. And that's what my mother did once I came back. And so I studied at the McCrae studio for many years.
You mentioned the name of the first school that you attended here.
The first school was Shakespeare Elementary School. And I think I went there with my sister Renee. Although there may have been another school for a week or so, I can't remember. But then after I moved to the Spiegels, I then went, or maybe even with the Spiegels, I was at Shakespeare because of where we lived. We lived on Drexel Boulevard. Once we moved to Madison Park in Hyde Park, I went to Kenwood Elementary School. And I went there, and that's where Hannah Caston was. And I went there until sort of 7.5, 7th grade, but 7.5, almost 8th grade, when my parents I was admitted to the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools, U-High. But in living in Hyde Park, of course, we belonged to Sinai Temple, which was a very large temple on the south side that was mostly populated by German Jews. And the rabbi, Louis Mann, lived not too far from us, and and we had Sunday school. So every Sunday morning, he would pick me up in his car and drive me to Sunday school. He's also the rabbi who married us. But he was, why am I bringing him up? Oh, I know why. Because in 1951, they had just finished building the new temple on South Shore Boulevard. And so they were having a dedication. And I wrote, that is, my mother wrote remarks, and they liked them, and so I got to speak at the dedication. And I talked about how proud I was to be Jewish and American, and to be able to tell the policeman on the corner or something. I mean, I was 11 years old, that I was American and coming to Sunday school and allowed to practice Judaism. That was, and I have photos from that time and all.
Where did you go after high school?
I went to Northwestern University and majored in theater and dance. Now, mostly theater, because they didn't have a very good dance department at that time.
Did you get married?
And then I got married, 1960, so after my junior year. And we lived on the north side.
What was your husband's name?
My husband's name was Frederick Stanton Lane. And 14 months after we got married, our son Russell was born. And then 1963, Beth was born, our daughter. And in 1969, our daughter Jennifer was born. So I have 3 children, and 7 grandchildren.
How did you meet your husband?
I met my husband on a blind date. Oh my gosh. Just at that time, the Theater Guild was, I guess it was the Theater Guild, was a functioning organization. And so this blind date, this man, young guy, called me up. And my parents have given me tickets to the theater. Would you like to go? I said, sure. I was a freshman at Northwestern. We went to see The Diary of Anne Frank, which, of course, my poor husband didn't know what he was taking me to. So that was quite an event itself. I also got to meet at Northwestern Joseph Schildkraut, who was an actor who portrayed Otto Frank when The Diary of Anne Frank came to Chicago in about 1958 or so.
How did you choose your children's names?
Well, my children's names, I was told, I think mostly by my husband, Fred, that we should name our children after a relative who had deceased. And he had either his grandmother, Rebecca, had died. And so I said, but it's a boy. That's how we got Russell. Beth, I don't remember at all. And Jennifer, I don't remember how we got their names.
You mentioned that you really didn't discuss your experiences with your husband.
Well, I mean, certainly he knew the Allies, but I didn't go into exquisite detail.
When did you tell your children that you were a Holocaust survivor?
I never said that. I never told them I was a Holocaust survivor. They knew, of course, that I was from Germany. I told them that. Again, I would say more of the bare outlines. I didn't really acknowledge that I was a Holocaust survivor until recently. I didn't think I deserved to lay that label because I had not been in concentration camp. I had not been tortured or suffered abuse. So how could I stand with those who did? But of course, after doing much reading, yes, in fact, I am a survivor. But I never wanted to go back to Germany until 2017, after my brother had died. And I felt, I need to go, and I need to take my children. By that time, I was divorced. But my former husband, Fred, came with us as well. And we all went back to Germany. And walked around the Scheunenviertel, which I didn't remember at all. But, and then went to the Jewish Museum of Berlin and, Checkpoint Charlie. So we did a tiny bit of the touristy things. But the next day, I had been in contact with these people who lived in Varennes, in the village where we were living for 2 years. And after a bit of correspondence back and forth, we planned to go and visit them. So we hired a car, and we drove out to Borin, and had a wonderful time with them. They just opened their hearts and their home to us. It turns out that he was the village historian.
Who are you referring to?
Herbert. Schuler. They lived in 2017 on this little. They had a home just outside of the village of Borin, where we'd been hidden. He'd been, I think, a high school teacher or a town historian. They knew about us. My brother had visited with them. So we visited with them. And I thought we would just meet these two people. And there was another man there. And who was that man? It was Arthur Schmidt's grandson, who had not known what his grandfather had done to save us. Fast forward 7 months, and now Arthur Schmidt was the third, and his wife and their son, Arthur Schmidt, they're all named Arthur Schmidt. It met us in Jerusalem, and we went to Yad Vashem to have Paula and Arthur Schmidt acknowledged and a plaque at Yad Vashem. So we were there for the ceremony, and which was a wonderfully moving experience.
As righteous among the nations?
They were named as righteous among the nations.
His grandfather had never told him about saving your family?
Never. That's the kind of person he was.
When you went back, did you go to the apartment that you were born in?
It was no longer there. They had torn it down, and they even changed the name of the street from Dragonerstrasse, which is what I remember, to Maxbierstrasse. But we went to the building. I mean, we went to the same place. And we walked around. We didn't go inside, but we went into the kind of courtyard in the back of the building, and it was very interesting just to be in that neighborhood.
You mentioned that you had 3 children. Do you have any grandchildren?
I have 7. Very happy to say I have 7 grandchildren. My son, Rusty, has a daughter, Taylor, who is a dancer, the only other dancer in the family, and son, Trevor. My daughter, Beth, has 3 boys, 2 of whom are twins. That's Joshua, named Joshua because my father had just died in May, and Josh was born the end of July. So he's Josh. And then 2 years later, or 3 years later, they had twin boys, Sebastian and Oliver. And so those are those 3, 5. And then my daughter, Jennifer, and her husband, Mark, have 2 children, Elliot, who is now 21, or will be 20. No, he's there. And Anya, who's 19 and is a freshman and they're both at Georgetown University in D.C. So I think that counts for 7.
Did your children marry other Jewish people?
No. None of my children married Jewish people.
Did you raise them?
But they've all raised their children Jewish.
Did you raise them with Jewish traditions?
Did I?
Raise your children with Jewish traditions?
Yes. I mean, when I was growing up, we celebrated Purim, and Passover and New Year, and I always was asked to speak during the New Year. I was confirmed. I wasn't bat mitzvah because Sinai did not do that. So at that time, it was 1954 or thereabouts. But we observed the holidays. But we also sometimes had a Christmas tree. So it was a mixed bag. But, and my father, who was from Canada, had grown up in an Orthodox home. And so was used to all the Orthodox dishes, but became, modernized. And we had our children, Fred and I, had our children go to Temple Sholem, we lived on the north side. And so they were all bar and bat mitzvah. But they chose other people to marry. But they insisted on raising their children, I think, with a knowledge of both religions.
After you finished going to the university, did you have a career?
No, I got married at the end of my junior year. So I continued to dance, and I taught even through college. But I suddenly, 14 months after I got married, I had a son. So I was a homemaker, and then I did a lot of teaching at the local high school and middle school. Not teaching, but arranging for dance programs, and so I was involved in things. And I did work for some time, I think, at a marketing firm. But in terms of having a career other than dance, no, I didn't.
I wanted to ask you, when you went back to Germany and you said the apartment was no longer there, are there any kind of memorials there?
This was when I went back in 2017, no. But more recently, we went back in September 2023 for the ceremony installing the Stolpersteines, which are the bronze plaques. And I thought to honor my mother, who'd been murdered at Auschwitz. But whatever the committee was said, no, we would like all of you. So we have 9 plaques installed. My mother, my father, and all 7 of us children. And it was a wonderful occasion and ceremony. One thing I omitted was that when I took my children and we went back in 2017, not only did we go to Berlin and to Borin, but we also went, of course, to Auschwitz. And then to Birkenau. And we placed a stone for my mother. people can rain down terror on other human beings is something I will never be able to come to terms with. It's happened for millennia. Anti-Semitism has been around for millennia, but it is something, I wasn't raised that way. I just can't, it's unfathomable to me to see how human beings can be so evil and so good at the same time. But I'm so grateful that I have always believed, and I still believe, that we have to hang on to the good, and that the good outdoes the bad. After 2017, after our trip back, and we came back, and the events of Charlottesville happened 2 weeks after we returned. I knew that I had to speak out much more forcefully than I had in the past. And I'd occasionally done some speaking about my experiences. But my daughter, Beth, was so moved by her experience that she knew then and there she had to make a film, which is called Unbroken. And it's a documentary that is in distribution now. It's poignant, it's remarkable. Of course, I'm very proud of what she has been able to do. It tells our story, but it also holds out a lot of hope.
Do you know how many family members were murdered in the Holocaust?
Of my family,
Mm-hmm.
I know that my mother was one of 11 or 12, and they were Hungarian, so they didn't get deported to Auschwitz until 1944. And I think almost all of them were murdered. My father's family, no. So I can't give you a number, except that it has to be upwards of between 10 and 20. It's not a huge number, but one is too many.
Do you read books or watch movies about the Holocaust?
Yes. And sometimes I say to myself, why? Why am I doing this over and over and over again? But I do. I began to study the Holocaust in 1961 with Elie Wiesel and Knight. And we had study sessions with the rabbi at Sholem at the time, and read about the war against the Jews and Lucy Davidovich. So I've done extensive reading through the years, perhaps more so now in the last 10 years, but I've always done some reading. And as I mentioned, I've done presentations, but not a lot, but I've done many more now. I've also connected with well, it's just gone out of my head.
What types of presentations do you do?
Just speaking to school, middle school and high school about my experience. Just because it's, it's easy to say never forget, but it's harder for people to forget once they actually hear a survivor talk about their experience.
Did you follow the trials of Adolf Eichmann and John Demjanjuk?
I did.
How did that affect you?
A lot of anger. A lot of anger. How could these people deny what they had done? I still have anger. How can people deny the Holocaust? And they're there, boy. And they're perhaps getting stronger. I followed what happened in 1976 when the neo-Nazis wanted to march in Skokie. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. I've been to the Illinois Holocaust Museum. I've given testimony to the U.S. Holocaust Museum. It always acknowledge and remember International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Before we conclude, can you tell me more about the reunion that you had when your family, the siblings, finally all came together?
In 1986, 2 years after I began using a wheelchair, I had lunch with the former director, retired director of the Jewish Children's Bureau, Mary Lawrence, who, by the way, had been operated on by my father. And that's how the adoption occurred so many years before. Anyway, I invited her to have lunch, and we did. And at the end of our lunch, or sometime during lunch, we had a lovely luncheon. She said, "Have you ever reconnected with your birth family?" I said, "No, not really." "Do they know about your accident?" I said, "No." And she looked at me. It's a very forthright woman. "Well, don't you think it's about time you told them?" So within that week, I contacted Gertrude because I'd received a birthday card maybe 10 years before from her, or a Jewish New Year's card. And I called her on the phone, and she picked up the phone. She said, "Hello." She said, "Hello?" And I said, "Manya?" And at the other end of the phone, Manya was the nickname that I used for her. I said, "Manya?" And all I heard on the other end of the phone was, and she said, "Why now?" And she knew who I was. And I said, "I tried to call you 10 years ago when I got your card, but no one was home." And she said, "Do you mean if I hadn't been home now for lunch, you would have waited another 10 years? And I said, "Well, it's very likely." Anyway, that started the ball rolling. She immediately called my brother, who came to visit the next day practically. And we had a reunion. So that was our first getting together after 40 years. We met at Gertrude's house. We lived in Homewood at the time. And just before going to this reunion, I told my children, of course, what had occurred. And they wanted to know more. And Jennifer, the youngest, said to me, "Mom, Wow, I never knew I had 23 first cousins. So we went to this reunion at Gertrude's house, and it was wonderful. And that was the 40th. That was then followed 10 years later, 1996, by the 50th reunion, which I had at my house. I was living in Highland Park at the time. And of course, my adoptive parents came to these occasions. And the very first time after I reconnected with them, my brother Alphonse was coming in town constantly. I don't know how he got away with leaving work so much, but he came in, and it was my mother's brother-in-law's birthday or something. They lived in Skokie. And I said, would it be okay if I bring Alphonse? Sure. So we went to visit them, and my brother Alphonse met my parents, and he asked if he could speak privately with my father. And so they went down into another room, and he said to my father, just on behalf of our family, I want to thank you. That shows you what a mensch Alphonse was. And my father, of course, said nothing. It shows you what a mensch he was. But the acknowledging that I was well taken care of and given a loving home was something that Alphonse wanted to acknowledge. For the 50th anniversary, we all went on the Odyssey sightseeing ship the day before our reunion, and had a wonderful time. I have a picture of it. I had a Statue of Liberty made out of styrofoam that a friend of mine who was an artist drew, and we lined up as we had lined up on Pier 64 to take our picture. We lined up in that same order with the Statue of Liberty behind us. I had a cake made in the shape of the United States, and red, white, and blue. I mean, it was a very festive, wonderful occasion. And all of my siblings' children and their families came. And there were now, we're talking about over 70 people. So that was quite an occasion. We got a letter from President Bill Clinton acknowledging this occasion. So all in all, it was good.
Do you continue to be in each other's lives? Do you continue to have a relationship?
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, my brother died in 2016. My sister Senta died in 2018. Then my sister Renee died in 2020, I think. And my sister Ruth just died last spring, so almost a year. So from 7, we are down to 3. My stepsister Gitta died 2 years ago. So, the family is shrinking, but the new births keep growing.
What is your greatest victory over Hitler?
We're still here. Nobody can take that away from us. We're here.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, over the years, I mean, I've seen Shoah, Claude Lanzmann film several times. I am deeply indebted to both the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Shoah Foundation for preserving, for documenting, for not only acknowledging, but recognizing the need to preserve these histories. They are remarkable. And of course, after so many years have passed, denial is easier. The forces of authoritarianism and fascism right now seem to be on the rise. So it is ever more important that we continue to speak out, to tell the story, but to also remember that there were wonderful people who helped us. I mean, I think of my own story. The priest, the Schmitz, the mayor, the villagers. It's like there was a movie back in the 50s called Somebody Up There Likes Me. It's as though somebody was watching over us to make sure that we would be okay. The Spiegels, my family. So, as much evil as there is in the world, there's also good. And I guess we have to keep remembering that. Otherwise, there's no hope. So, thank you to the Shoah Foundation and Steven Spielberg.
Thank you, Ginger.
These are pictures of my father and mother, taken, I believe, at their wedding. My father, Alexander Weber, my mother, Lena Banda. They were married September 12th, 1926, in Rákospalota, Hungary, a suburb of Budapest. This is a picture of my birth certificate. Notice that it says the wedding. Wedding was the district in Berlin where I was born on November 27th, 1939. And it says that my name is Bela Weber. And you will also note at the bottom the stamp of the German government at the time with the eagle. This picture is of our apartment building in Berlin that was completely destroyed during the last 2 weeks of the war, where we could not return and we were sort of buried underneath in the basement. And Herr Schmidt had to dig us out, becoming for the second or third time our savior. This image is of the ration cards that were distributed and given to us so that we could buy food provisions and small items of clothing.
Good.
Paula and Arthur Schmidt, to whom we owe our lives, on whose farm or fruit orchard we lived for almost 2 years, as hidden children near the village of Vorin, Germany, about 60 kilometers east of Berlin. A wonderful and loving man. Schmidt never acknowledged what he did for us in saving us, but he is definitely our hero. This official notice was sent to us about my mother's death. It is in a very traditional German factually based evidence, giving her date of birth, the name of her parents, the day that she died, and the hour and minutes in which she died. She was murdered in Auschwitz, at least December 1st, 1943. This page shows the document of my father, and if you look closely at the image, he is gaunt, his eyes are hollow and staring, and it is his official document as a victim of fascism. The red image below shows that he is a victim of fascism and entitled to the rights as a victim. Okay. These are images of the DP cards that we were issued so that we could finally emigrate to America. And here's the ship's manifest showing all 7 of us on board the SS Flasher that left Bremerhaven, Germany, I think on May 10th or 11th, and arrived in New York Harbor on May 20th, 1946. Here we are at Dock 64, actually Pier 64, in New York, arriving on May 20th, 1946. All 7 of us, after we had declared ourselves orphans, having arrived on the SS Flasher, you can see that I'm not very happy. I guess I don't like flashing light bulbs. And this is amidst enormous confusion in this huge shed because we were the first ship that arrived with refugees from war-torn Europe. This picture is up on the wall in the permanent exhibit at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
It's supposed to be of you with your adoptive family, and I can't see, is it, I don't know if it's that one?
There are 3 images here. The one in the upper right is of my mother and me. If you look carefully, you'll see that she made our at-home outfits. She was an incredibly talented woman. Sewing was just one thing she'd love to do. Below that is a picture of my father and me, which I love. And then in the upper left corner is a picture of my brother Jonathan, my sister Petra, and me. And this would have been taken when I was about 16. So Jonathan would have been about 7, and Petra would have been about 5. All 7 of us are seated in Gertrude's home for the 40th anniversary of our getting together in 1986. You see at the top row Gertrude, Judith, and Senta. The bottom row, me, Alphonse, Renee, and Ruth. Ready? My brother's, Jonathan's wedding. There's a picture of Beth, myself, Fred, Russell, and Jennifer.
Sandy.
Got it.
And here we are, May 26, 1996, at our 50th anniversary party, which we held at my house in Highland Park. And if you notice the image of the Statue of Liberty behind us, and in the little one, we're kind of lined up in the same order as we were when we landed.
Okay.
Here's a picture of Elliot, Anya, and me at Lincoln Park Zoo. That was taken actually for disability history. They were very young, but looking really cute.
Okay.
Here's a good group photo of our whole family. Unfortunately, Anya was busy still being in her mother's tummy, so she wasn't born yet, but the rest of us are there. It was during a Mediterranean cruise that we all went on to be experimented on and
murdered.
removed.
Yes.
All right.
This image is of Women's History Month, where I was honored along with several other women by the city of Chicago. And it appeared on every bus stop in the city of Chicago and on all the billboards on the major highways going into and out of Chicago. Friends of mine happened to call and say, I almost had an accident because I saw your name up on that darn billboard and your image. Wow. This was taken in 2022.
Okay.
Can we also do this one or
yeah.
not?
Yeah, start with that one and then scroll to the next one.
These are the Stolpersteins, the brass plaques commemorating that we were victims of the Holocaust, victims of fascism. They are placed in the sidewalk in front of the building of our last residence that we voluntarily lived in Berlin.
Just get the next one. Got it. Okay.
Unbroken is the story of our family. produced and directed and created by Beth Lane. And it is an award-winning documentary that she finished in 2023.